So, Austin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah, dude, the gang is back.
Yeah, the gang's back.
The
So,
boys back in town.
yeah, the boys are back in town. So I know, Josh and I kind of talked what last week, this week. When we talked, when did we talk, Josh?
Me and you were kind of always in a conversation.
Well, I know, but like we did another episode, and I honestly
Oh yeah,
didn't
yeah, yeah.
remember what we were talking about on
No,
that.
Andrew did green out though.
I did green out. I'm trying to decide if I'll post it or not, but like I greened out pretty bad. Like
No, so like Austin, like I like we were in the middle of like a conversation. I was like talking about something, and then like I like flipped it over to Andrew, and like we sat there for like 10 minutes of silence.
This just sounds like the ultimate like blooper reel.
yeah.
He randomly just comes back in. He was like, "Oh, yeah."
Well, see, the issue that I have, like even right now, dude, is like I like because I'm in my house in Atlanta, and so like we're moved out. Like there's the only furniture in my house is my bed, and so like I took a break while I was in Europe, and it'd been about like 3 weeks, and so like everything was out, and then I came back, and like I'm sitting here with Josh, and it had been like the first time in like probably a day, like probably about maybe about 3 weeks, and I was just sitting here, and I was all cozy and shit, and I was just like boom out, and I was like, it's like yeah, Josh, like. I woke up and like Josh was still on. I was like, "Oh fuck, I'm like podcasting right now," and I was like, "Oh shit." So we'll see on that one. We'll see on that one.
Nice. I'm
But
surprised you haven't commented on like my name either, since you were in Europe for like 3 weeks.
well, you'd be my Well, I guess maybe you'd be my American lover. I don't know. No, maybe you'd be my American, or yeah, you'd be European. You'd be like what? You'd be my Hungarian.
I like how
He's
you guys.
Irish.
I like how I've just like used like so many different names at this point. You guys are just like, I'm not going to acknowledge it. It's just
Well,
whatever.
it's whatever. It's like
He's
who else
definitely
could it be?
He's Irish.
So one thing I really kind of wanted to pick your brain on, Austin, is so like I know you're more in the foreign policy stuff than I am. Like, so can you like make sense of what's going on in the Middle East right now?
In terms of like which part, because I mean, it seems like every day there's always something like really
I
random
guess
happening.
so. I mean, like I don't really want to put too much time on the whole jet thing. I'm gonna put that to the side. I think that's been like murdered to death. But like, what about like just what's happening in terms of the deals that are trying to get with Iran, the basically getting the JCPOA Part Two or Rev Two on, like what's kind of going on as far as that? I know like Syria's kind of being pseudo recognized. I know Trump did a lot of talking about like trying to go from like a away from like a nation builder, mindset and everything like that. So like what's kind of going on, and then like what are we missing?
Uh, I think it's mostly like a recognition at this point that like a lot of like Turkey in particular is kind of at a point now where it's like strong enough it can kind of be an actor, and then Iran's been an actor for a little bit. So I think a lot of it's just like the U.S. is trying to manage a position to where, like, 20 years ago, we really didn't have to worry that much about, like, okay, what does Turkey think or what does, you know, Qatar think? And then, like, nowadays, it's like, okay, these nations actually matter. They've actually reached the point where we actually have to consider them and they're able to, like, influence things to their own extent.
Do you think they're influencing American policy in that way?
I
Like, do you
mean,
think they're kind of driving like what's happening?
I don't necessarily think they're driving, but I definitely think they are an influence. Like, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but all of a sudden there's been this, like, huge freak out over, like, Qatari influence. And to me, it just feels like it's pretty much overblown. I mean, like, no doubt they exercise influence, but it's like, I think a lot of it's just like for so long there hasn't been like a very cohesive, like non-Israeli influence in American politics with the Middle East. So now that there's, like I said, like a lot of these nations now are able to exercise influence. Like the one that's been like a huge sleeper is Turkey. Like I
Yeah.
remember you guys remember that, like I think it was like a couple
Yes,
years ago where like
yes.
what was it, like the New York mayor got in trouble for it, and then like who was it? I know there was like, was it Bob Menendez in New Jersey got in trouble for like,
He
was
was
that Turk?
Egypt.
Oh, that was Egypt. Okay, that was Egypt. I can't remember which one he was,
But
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 it's
it,
like
it kind of it kind of goes to what you're saying though, where it's like, okay, Turkey's there, you got
Egypt's there.
Egypt, Qatar is still there, like doing their thing. Obviously, the UAE and Saudi. Like, it seems like everyone's kind of doing something. To be honest, I'm surprised you haven't seen any like Iraqi kind of like influence coming in somewhere.
A lot of it's just like Iraq is still so broken from like the
Yeah.
last like several decades of like conflict. The Qatar thing, like just kind of on itself, is very interesting because if you look it up, like back in like '96, Qatar was literally just like literally basically just like an empty desert with like a few 100,000 people
Yeah.
living in it, and now it's this huge like geopolitical actor. So it really is kind of insane when you stop and realize within like our lives, like that whole region has changed. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of cuts to a lot of it. Like there's just so many actors now that like we're now having to like. It's not like it was in 2003 when it was just kind of us. Now it's like, okay, you got these players, you got those players, and
Yeah.
if you really start digging into it, it's weird how much it interconnects with everything else. Like,
Mhm.
you know, like there's a lot of evidence to suggest the Turks and the Iranians were playing a role in what just happened with like Pakistan and India. So I mean, like they're starting to branch out too. It's no longer it's just confined to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you think anyone's going to sign on to an Abraham Accords here soon? Any of those parties?
The Syrians, the new government claimed they would. I'm kind of curious to see how that play out because it seems, you know, it's like I mean maybe they could, but like, uh, I don't know. It really depends on how much you're putting faith on. Like, is the recent like reporting of like a split between Trump and Netanyahu real or not? Because if it is, then no. But if it's not, it's hard to say. But it does seem like the whole Gaza situation has kind of prevented any real movement for most countries. Like
Yeah.
their governments may want to sign on to that, but there's also a situation where it's like their
Yeah, their
people
people are
are like,
completely different.
yeah, and they've kind of learned the lesson from like Egypt and stuff of why you don't want to push that too far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you are you thinking that like do you think there's the split between Netanyahu and Trump?
He did an interview the other day and said there wasn't. I mean, there has been some like really weird like moves and signs, but like it's
Wait, he
just
he is in Netanyahu or Trump?
Trump claimed there was no because he was.
Okay.
I think it was CBS interviewed him the other day, and he was like, "No, there's no." But then like there was some recent visits that were planned were canceled, and then there was some leaked reporting that like he was like not going to require Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel. It's I don't know. I really don't know what to make of that. To me, it seems kind of like it's just a wait and see thing because it's hard to say. Because then like right after that, like there was the thing came out where they were still looking to like quote unquote resettle Gaza's population like Libya, and then they denied those reports. I mean, there's just so much going on right now. It's really hard to kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah.
Which that
Keep going.
that whole Libya plan is just if you
That
know
one,
anything.
that one puzzles me. I don't really know what's going on with that.
Well, it's an active war zone, so it's like, oh, we're trying to resettle, a million civilians from one active war zone to another active war zone, and
Well, but
like,
I think it's also part of like because from what I heard is it was like with Libya specifically, it's like it's basically like a civil war at this point. You got two
yeah,
groups that are fighting. You got each one's trying to get some legitimacy and they're trying to get some support and all this other kind of stuff. And so like part of the deal was like Trump taking the uh it was like the illegal immigrants or whatever that he was like trying to ship back or ship over, like how he was doing in El Salvador. People were, or I think there was the plan to ship them to Libya and let them kind of do the same thing. And I
but
think that's kind of like the whole Gaza part's kind of getting brought up into that too. Is like almost like your dumping ground for like
well,
people.
what's really funny about that is if you remember back in like 2023, they were talking about doing that with like. I know Congo for sure, and then I think they talked about Uganda there for a while, and it's like, okay, again, another active war zone. But what makes it even funnier is it's like, for one, for Libya, if anybody knows anything about Libya and like immigration flows in Europe, most of the illegal immigration problem into Europe is that it comes through Libya after the government collapsed.
Yep.
After we overthrew
Like
Gaddafi.
Libya and Syria, right?
Yeah, I mean, Libya is like the exit point. It's not necessarily the origin point, but pretty much all like African immigration into Europe basically goes through Libya because that's where it's like it's an unstable government. It's not like Algeria and Tunisia, which have fairly stable governments. But anyway, so like you want to put millions of people, desperate people, into a country that's known for being an outpoint for immigration. Like, okay, it doesn't take an idiot to put two and two together on that, what that's going to mean for Europe. But there's also just like Libya has lots of oil. Libya sits next to like major shipping routes to the Mediterranean. It's like I don't know. And then like you look into like the economies of like other African nations. Like I think Ivory Coast is the best example of this. Like I think like 2% of their population is like Lebanese from like like a legacy of like the French being there, but they
Mhm.
control like 40% of the economy. And it's like okay, let's just put like millions of Palestinians that have absolutely no reason to have any love for the U.S. or Israel in an oil-rich nation next to shipping lanes. I'm sure nothing bad will happen from that. I'm sure.
And I think I've heard are like pretty educated and all that
Oh
kind
yeah.
of stuff. So like would probably become don't want to say the ruling class, but would be up there, you know?
I mean, they basically did in other places.
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, it's like you're really just. I mean, and I think that and like back when they were talking about the Congo plan, that was something me and a lot of other people were making fun of because it was like, guys, like the Congo is like one of the world's like top sources of like nickel and cobalt. Like, these materials you guys keep saying are going to be critical this century for like, batteries and everything else. It's like, yeah, let's just put millions of people, skilled people at that, with
Yeah.
absolutely no reason to love you. It's like you really apparently learned nothing from like that whole because they quietly dropped that plan, and I think a lot of it was because people were pointing out like, guys, this doesn't make any sort of strategic sense in the long run.
Yeah.
And it's like I told somebody else, it makes more like at this point, like they're trying to do everything, but like the simplest and most easy option, which would be like, hey, Israel, it's time to cut this out. Like you got what you wanted. Like it's time to let Gaza, And there's just like a really weird, just inability to come to terms with that.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of how I was where like my first switch with Israel was it was like like when they started dropping bombs in Syria. And I was kind of like, I don't really know if we need to be doing that kind of thing, Like I don't really know if that's what like and it was kind of like, oh, you're bombing people and they're like at an embassy or near an embassy. I'm like okay, like you're kind of getting a little unhinged here, right? Like you're kind of going a little too far. And then they kept doing all these other kind of things. And like for me, that's when I was like, oh, okay, like I think the cat's out of the bag, their dog's on the leash kind of a thing. But it almost kind of makes me think like, okay, like honestly, I think some of this of what Israel has done in Gaza, if Trump can kind of like pull everybody in into like a coalition, then it almost kind of makes me think that like that's how he's going to get a better deal out of Iran. Because I think about like everyone's kind of coming in and kind of making deals with him, right? Libya is, Syria is, Turkey is, Lebanon. I'm not entirely sure about them, but they've kind of are getting into a more or less or a more destabilized position with Hezbollah gone, and it's like okay, all these people are kind of like coming into a more favorable U.S. position, and it almost makes me think like okay, like what's going to be the end result with Iran? I don't know if I'm going to say a regime change is going to happen because of all this, but like almost kind of like okay, like are they going to be more isolated, or how is all that going to work? What do you think?
I mean, from all the reporting, it seems like the deal's going nowhere with Iran. Like they
That's why
announced
I'm like
today.
get everybody. That's why I'm like they're going to get everybody against them and being like, we've isolated you. You know?
I mean, that in theory's always been the play, and it made a lot more sense back in like the 2010s because that was back when like the Saudis and the Iranians were like at the height of like their antagonism. But now it's like the Saudis have directly, publicly said like, hey, we're not going to do any sort of deal with Israel as long as they're doing this in like Gaza or this in Palestine or whatever. And then like kind of slipped under the radar. Back in 2023, the Iranians and Saudis basically forged a detente agreement under the auspices of China. So I mean, it's
Yep.
like, yeah, I mean, like we may be like gaining ground in like Syria, but at the same time, it's like the Chinese have kind of undone the whole aspect of it, and like the rest of Arabia. And then too, like Turkey and Qatar are kind of their own axis, and they have fairly decent relations with Iran. So I mean, like they'll cut deals with like the U.S. here or there, but it's like they're still their own player. They're not like right now. Like Turkey's more worried about Israel and Syria than it is about Iran doing whatever Iran's doing over in its own corner.
Yeah.
Now the thing with Libya too is like okay, so like the faction the U.S. is, from what I understand from the reports, is the faction they were working with is I believe the if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to get the acronym wrong. It's not like an idiot. Like the GNA, which is I think Haftar's group. So he's traditionally been very Turkish aligned, but now he's kind of trying to, I guess, kind of branch out more. But see, the issue with that is Haftar and the Turks have really bad relations with the Egyptians. From like back in 2020, there was actually kind of like a war scare between them. So it's kind of we're kind of reaching a point where it's like, yeah, like in theory you can like bring these groups together, but at the cost of like you're probably pissing somebody else off because that region is just so. I'm not really sure what the term I want to use for it here is. Kind of, I guess, it's just so disunited. And I don't think that's a word strong enough, but like the whole Middle East right now is just going through like so many fluxes. Like, so there's that. But we'll see. I really think based on the reporting and like how disjointed the U.S. seems and like what it actually wants out of the Iranian deal. I don't know. And then like the other really crazy thing, I don't know if everybody saw it the other day, but like wasn't it like 52 Republican senators and like so many hundreds of
Everybody
House
but Rand
members?
Paul wrote the letter to Trump, right?
Yeah, and it's like okay, that's another thing because it's like we're talking about like the foreign angle of it, but now you also got to kind of put it against like the domestic angle. So I'm not really convinced there's going to be a deal, or if there's a deal, it'll basically be like you said, it'll just be like a rerun of like the whole Obama thing. So it's like if that happens, like I think everybody's just got to stop and be like, okay, what was the point of like the last decade? Because it's like they signed that deal in 2015, he threw it out in 2017, and now it's like a decade later we signed the exact same deal again. Yeah.
Yeah. But I could see Trump coming back and kind of making that an argument though, like okay, like hey, like Gaza's been destroyed, Hamas has basically been defeated, right? Like he'll even though you can make the argument, okay, they're still fighting, they're coming back even stronger, all this other kind of stuff. I could see it being like, hey, like Turkey's position with the United States is good. Syria is in a much better place than it was. Lebanon is in a much better place than it was. Libya is maybe in a better place than it was. Egypt is still Egypt. A lot of these Saudi countries are still Saudi. Yemen is over there. I mean, we've kind of like already made that deal with them where they're like, hey, just don't attack American ships. It's like I can kind of see Trump kind of like lowering the temperature on a lot of this and almost just kind of being like, hey, like we're in a much better position. And so now the deal makes sense, right? Like I could see him kind of making the argument. I mean, I don't see him making the argument, but I would make the argument
Oh
that like,
yeah,
hey,
I
hey,
could
in
do. I,
2017, like this deal was shit because Syria was all fucked up, and Iran was funneling shit through Syria and Iraq and into Lebanon directly into Israel. Libya was still a shithole from Hillary Clinton and all that kind of stuff happening. The Yemen issue is still happening. I could see it being like, hey, like look, we're in a much better position now, so now it makes sense as long as Iran's willing to kind of back off the terrorist stuff, right? I could see or the subversive stuff. I could see that kind of being like, hey, like that's the way to kind of stabilize kind of what's happening here, and then saying, okay, now it makes sense for there not to be an Iranian weapon because right now there's not any conflicts. Like you mentioned, China and has brokered that deal. Everyone's kind of in this like detente kind of like chill level. And I can see Trump being like, okay, like now that that region is stabilized, now we're going to go somewhere else. But I don't know. Like it's just one of those things where it's like I could see that coming out as kind of like being the output. Like that's what I would probably work for. I don't know if you're really going to get a much better deal than the JCPOA, but I could also see like him trying to spin it and being like, look, this is a huge win for us. You know?
no, I have no doubt about it. And like you kind of saw that in like a microcosm because like originally came out like, oh, we beat the Houthis. Like yeah, we like did all this and that, and like now obviously like we cut a deal with them. We can just do this or that. But and then it comes out like a few days later in the New York Times. It's like, yeah, there was deeper reasonings like they wanted to do this. Like,
Well,
so I mean,
you want it to be like it'd be like in my mind, it's like instead of it being NAFTA, it's the USMCA. You know what I mean? Where it's like,
oh
okay,
yeah,
it's
oh yeah.
NAFTA, but a little bit better on certain things. And yeah, it's maybe a little bit more in the US position, but all in all, like it's basically the same. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, he's definitely like a spin master, so I can definitely see something like that. And like, but now, too, on that note, like another thing to kind of like emphasize on that, like things may look good on the surface right now, but like it's kind of becoming more and more clear. It's like I don't know. Did you read the art? Did you read the New York Times article on like the Houthi thing?
No.
I need to send that to you. So so it came out like there was a big reason like they were pushing to like end it and then try to spin it as a win is because like you guys saw where like all those like F-18s were like lost, right?
I mean, are you talking about like the one lost off the jet?
So within a 2 week span, they lost two F-18s, and
Yeah.
like so it came out both of them were basically lost because the Houthis were firing at the air carrier, and so the
Mhm.
carrier was taking evasive maneuvers and it lost those. So you could be like more or less that I would consider that a loss because it's because the enemy fired those aircraft were lost. But then it got even deeper. Like it came out like the Houthis nearly shot down an F-35, and that's
Yeah.
like that's our most recent stealth fighter. So it's like okay, if the Houthis can do that,
There's
stop
other
against
problems.
yeah. So it's like the Iranians are supplying the Houthis. Like stop and consider what that means for a second.
Yeah.
So I mean like. We're kind of in a situation now where I think that's part of the reason he's pushing to get so much done because it's like it's only going to get worse, like in terms of like a hand here. Because like if a little rebel group down in Yemen can do it, then okay, we're reaching a point where like this is something we've talked about too is like missile technology now. Like you no longer need aircraft carriers to deny sea access to people. You can have land-based missile systems fairly cheaply do that.
Yeah.
And like so, I mean, like I do think like that is another factor in the background where he'll get basically the same deal, call it a victory, and then like if he gets the same deal, and then like okay, that's it, and then after that, like we basically need to wash our hands of the entire region because, and then too, the other thing that came out was like the reason that first F-18 was lost, and this is the second time this has happened. One of the Houthis like ballistic missiles got through the carrier group's like air cover, so like their anti-aircraft weaponry and all that. It managed. I think they say it landed within. I want to say the report I saw was like it got within like I think 200 meters, and I'm not even going to bother trying to translate that into feet, but like what is that like 600 feet?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's close enough. You guys are better at math than me. So it's
Yep.
like okay, we've reached a point now where
It's
like
like two
this.
football fields.
Yeah, it's and like that sounds like a lot to us. A carrier is like what, like 5 football fields. So, I mean, it's really not.
It's more than that. It's way. I mean, it might be more than that.
So it's like 2 football fields is really not that much when you consider the size of a carrier itself, and like the fact that like they lost that F-18 because they were turning so hard, like they were conducting evasive maneuvers that strong, really does suggest like it got really really close.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, so it's kind of at a crossroads point where it's like get what you can and get out is kind of the way I'm looking at it at this point.
So let me give you an example. So the Nimitz class, which I think is like basically one of the top, is I think the current state of the art, is about 1,100 feet in length.
So yeah, so like basically half its length away was like a missile, and like one would probably not be enough to sink it, but if it hit it would do enough damage, we would have to pull it out of theater.
Oh yeah, and it's pulled out for how long? Now, what kind
Yeah,
of energy your adversaries have, etc. Yeah, 100%.
it's like you're in. Till you gotta look at it, it's like okay, like you damn well know China's sitting there like okay, very interesting data we're getting out of this.
Like imagine you throw a hypersonic missile on that bitch and like see what
Oh yeah,
happens.
and then too, it's like if the Houthis can track and shoot at an F-35 with like their like hand-me-down radars and stuff. Now imagine what the Russians and Chinese are doing with like their state-of-the-art stuff.
Well, and I think honestly, like, I think the bigger question is like, okay, so I know Iran is backing the Houthis,
hmm
but it's like, okay, but like you start kind of going up one more layer. Well, who's helping Iran out?
Oh
And
yeah,
I could totally, I don't know if I'd say, and that's the thing is like, that's where I kind of get mixed, where I'm like, okay, it's either Russia or China and China, or Russia or China, or Russia and China. And I'm like, okay, and then there's also, you've got obviously North Korea's helping Iran and stuff like that to share, needs and stuff. But it's like, okay, like that extra layer is a question that I would probably be asking Trump and being like, look, who's helping the Iranians out here?
oh it's
Like the
both.
Chinese are getting the oil from them, but like Russia's like also buying the drones from Iran, and so like there's probably a deal going on there. Like that's the question that you want to know. And I think if any, honestly, sometimes I think about it, I'm like, I think this is a good thing for the United States because I'm like, look at what happened in Ukraine, like that shift to drone technology, like if we didn't do that, like we'd probably be fucked in a few years if we ended up going into a war with China and we had no capabilities in that area.
I mean, it's definitely both sides are learning the lesson, but then like too, the thing you got to think about is like the Chinese are also like I don't know if you saw that report. I think it was the NYT too, where they were like, "Oh yeah, there's like PLA officers on the ground with like the Russians, like getting like firsthand like experience, like they're not directly participating, but they're kind of there as like military attaches, like." And then too, there's been rumors for a while that those North Korean soldiers that are participating are not just North Koreans. Now, I've not seen any strong evidence for that, but then again, it's kind of like I could definitely like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like yeah, that one guy was definitely a North Korean kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
So I mean, like there's definitely everybody's getting experience for the next round. It's a lot of people have compared like the Ukraine war to the Spanish Civil War that happened in the 30s, right before World War II, and I'm increasingly agreeing with that perspective, just because it's both because the international level of involvement, but it's also just like so obvious that the everybody's kind of getting some lessons out of it.
Yeah.
Figuring out what works, what doesn't.
So I'm looking at I just Googled this. And basically China is the largest importer of Iranian crude oil.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, like and some of the other ones are like UAE, India, Pakistan, Yemen, Singapore, Malaysia, so like much smaller economies. But it's like, except for India, right? And it's like, okay, but like who sits there at the top and like who's vested in this? And that's where I almost kind of think like, okay, like Yemen's a proxy war,
Oh
between
yeah.
Iran and the US, but it's almost kind of reminds me a lot of
So
like Vietnam, right? So you had like the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese with like a Yemen and like the U.S. backed people there. There's obviously some Yemen people, Saudi, all those kind of people there. And it's like, okay, so who's helping the North Vietnamese? Well, China's helping the North Vietnamese, and indirectly the Chinese or the Russians were helping. And so you kind of have like a lot of this kind of stuff going on, and it almost kind of makes me think like that's what's going on in Yemen,
oh
and
yeah, for sure it
that's
is,
what's
and
happening in
like
probably these other areas.
so the thing with Yemen, so I think it was last year it came out the Russians had been wanting to send them some like advanced like stuff to kind of mess around with us. I can't remember. I think it was in retaliation for I want to say like the Kursk thing, but I might be wrong on that. But there was like rumors, there was like reports that like the Russians were wanting to send them some advanced stuff, and the Saudis talked them out of it. So officially nothing happened, but at the same time, now that we know like an F-35 nearly got hit, I'm kind of like, kind of makes me wonder, under the table, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of deal. And then a lot of the Houthi like missile designs are kind of like refined versions of like older Chinese designs. It's not like they're newer stuff, but it's like stuff the PLA had like a couple of decades ago or something, and all of a sudden like the same design lineage is. So I mean, like yeah, there's definitely some stuff going on there, no doubt.
And honestly, like as you're kind of saying that, it kind of makes me be like, yeah, like you're definitely not going to get a regime change in Iran.
No.
You know what I mean? Like that's just not going to happen because
They back
other
them too
people
much.
are too invested in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then too, the other thing to kind of you brought up like Indians and Pakistan's like that is that whole region is very convoluted in its loyalties. How like the alliances work, like especially right now, if like the stuff going on in Afghanistan is really really weird when you kind of dig into it. But specific to what happened there, since we hadn't had a chance to talk about it. So the Indians have like 36 Dassault Rafales, I think is how they pronounce it. I don't speak, frog, but that's like state of the art, like for the Europeans. It's like a 4.5 generation jet, and then the Pakistanis are using J-10s, which are like China's default like 4.5 gen fighter. And it came out like right before they started. The Chinese supplied them with their PL-15s, which are like it's not their newest, but it's one of their newest and most advanced air-to-air missiles.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was, there's been report after report now that like that's absolutely shocked everybody because the Pakistanis were able to beat the Indians flying the Western plane. So you got that, and then you put it on top of the stuff that just happened with Yemen. It's kind of like it's a really big wake up call to everybody. Like, hey, like you can't just keep writing the Chinese off. Like their tech is actually like it's the results speak for themselves. Like if used properly, like their tech is actually up to snuff. So that's been like another, talking like proxy wars and that whole thing, like two, so like I said, like everybody's kind of got like weird loyalties in that region, but then like the whole thing with that is just like there's going to be a lot of interesting lessons I think learned from that because apparently that was the first major beyond visual range engagement in at least 21st century history, but if not history period. Because I think when the Gulf War happened, that was before BVR was like the default, which BVR stands for beyond visual range. So like the way everybody thinks war is going to go now in terms of like air combat is it's like people that came and see each other except for like radar or something like hundreds of miles away just launching missiles back and forth at each other. So like that was the first example of that in like modern military history. So talk about proxy war, that's a pretty interesting marker too, I think.
Yeah. I didn't want to go super into kind of what's going on in Russia with Ukraine, but I guess like maybe I'll just make this like a whole foreign policy uh, discussion. But what do you think is kind of going on there? Like, do you think that's like, do you think we're any closer? I know obviously we're not like super close or anything like that, but like, what are you kind of seeing on that end?
I mean, it really doesn't feel like either side's really wanting to like cut a deal at this point. And I mean, there's reasons for that. There was a report in I can't remember which major newspaper it was today, and they were like, "Yeah, Russian soldiers were like, yeah, we don't want a peace. Like, we want to actually win this, like apps, like directly, like uncontestably win it." So there's that. So it's like even if like Putin wanted to like cut a deal, it's like he would have to face like, hey, like the military being like, hey, we were about, we could have won it, and you like cut a deal. And that, so there's that, and then two, Zelensky has the same issue where it's like a lot of his military is absolutely against any sort of negotiations. They want to win it. So I mean, I really don't see it going anywhere unless like something major happens. Like it would take the Chinese coming out and basically being like, "Hey, you guys make peace." For I think there'd be any like real changes.
Yeah. And do you think that'd be like the last domino to fall?
If like the Chinese did it,
Yeah, if the Chinese kind of were like, do you think what's going to happen in the Middle East and then everything actually happening uh in India and all that kind of stuff? Do you think that do you think the Ukraine thing will probably be the last thing to settle?
it's hard to say. I mean, the Indian thing basically is already settled. I mean, the underlying issues are still there, so I wouldn't be surprised if like down the line there's like further fighting. But like for the immediate future, it seems like it's calmed down. But now the stuff in the Middle East, it'll calm down, but as much as you can. The Middle East, but like the middle, it's one of those places where like calm down is kind of relative. It's like instead of like constant major battles and like hundreds of thousands of people dying or whatever, it's more like, oh, we only a few hundred died or something. So
Yeah.
I mean, the Ukraine, it'll really depend. It's been a while since I looked into like, okay, where is everybody's like relative balance of like resources? I do know like the Russians are meeting all of their recruitment goals. They're staying pretty steadily supplied. So as long as that's going on, they'll keep fighting. And now for the Ukrainians, it really depends on like how much like resources they're getting from the West and whatnot. Now the big factor, it kind of depends on what they meant by this. The Chinese the other day said they're going to increase their cooperations with the Russians, and they didn't specify if that meant like in terms of like Ukraine or what. But like the Chinese do start like seriously seeking to help the Russians, that would definitely decisively tip the balance. Like the Chinese are sitting on, I think, like for one, they supply most of the drone like tech used by both sides. So like if they were able to cut off the Ukrainian access to drones, that would be huge. If they start supplying the Russians with like the tens, if not hundreds of millions of artillery shells we know they have, like that would be huge. So it really depends. But as of now, I don't really see that ending anytime soon.
Okay. What's kind of your take on all this, Josh? What do you I know you're kind of about to get on a plane here, and I know you got to end in a few minutes, but what are you kind of seeing or thinking?
Like in what realm?
I guess just like I guess I'm always more curious about you like what you think from like actual political side and from that end of like winning an election and stuff like that. Do you how are you kind of seeing what's happening with Trump's foreign policy? Do you think that's something that Republicans are gonna get a win on, or do you think not?
Dude, I don't know. I'll be honest, man. Dude, like, it's like, and I know, I want your own opinion too. But the thing with the organization right now is, I feel like they'll do something that's like really good, or like one or two things that's really good, and then they follow it with just as much like something that I don't necessarily think is great.
Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like we're breaking even. Um, so I don't really know fully, and I'll be honest, like I'm trying to like get my headspace. I'm sorry, guys, I spent a whole week in Michigan doing uh Tax Cuts and Jobs Act stuff, so I'm like trying to get into the foreign policy mindset. But with that, it's like, I try to take a look at it when I can, but I think they're doing the right things overall. I think the Republicans are going to have to figure out how they're going to make it work for them, though, because if they don't figure out how to make it work for them, they're just kind of like losing laps on it.
But I mean, I guess like from a political side, right? Like we were just talking about all these senators kind of signing off against it. Let's say Trump can get a deal. Maybe he redoes the JCPOA. Do you think that's going to cause an issue with, say, who's the North Carolina senator? Is that I thought it's
You like Graham?
Tom
no, North
Tillis.
Carolina,
Tom
Tillis.
Tillis. Yeah.
Oh my bad.
So Tillis, like, do you think that's going to cause an issue for Tillis? Like, like those kind of guys.
I think yeah. I think you'll see a lot of um, like just like people that are either like senators or congressmen in their state. I think you'll see a lot of them that catch backlash for it. Just depending on where you're at, really though. I like it will make it harder for their midterms.
Do you think they'll get primaried?
Yeah, I 100% think you'll see a lot of people that try to come out and try to primary and be like, I'm the true conservative, which is something
Yeah.
that happens every midterm. But um, you'll
Even
see
if
a
that
lot
means
of
running
that.
against Trump.
See, that's the thing though, is like at what point, see, like I've always I've always said that to every like group I go to. I'm like, at what point, like, can you like run as a Republican against a Republican and like maybe not agree with Trump fully?
Yeah.
Because like every time that I've ever seen that, like up to this point now, if you even spoke one thing against it, like you could agree with him on everything, but like one little thing that you're like, well, I don't think he's right on this. Like you're immediately called him right now.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Which, kind of on that note, we really need to do an episode talking about tariffs and like the whole like Moody's debt downgrade.
Well, and that could be another one. I'll be honest. I listened to um an episode with Orrin Cass and Tucker, and honestly, like I was listening to him, and I had heard him on some other stuff too, but it was one of those where I was kind of like, dude, you need to be driving this fucking like
Oh, I love Warren Cass. Like Warren
and
Cass.
I'm like, and I'm not like I didn't agree with everything he said, but I think just the more of like the flexibility that I think he kind of was having with stuff. I think the long term, like, hey, like here's the direction we need to go, um, and stuff like that. Like, I think that stuff for me, I'm like, okay, like Oren is great, but like I think some of the stuff that I would maybe argue with him on is once you start kind of getting into the detail, right? Because like when I was listening to him with Tucker's and from the other interviews, he's like, yeah, we shouldn't have done it this way with Trump. Like we shouldn't have done Liberation Day the way we did it. We shouldn't have like done this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, great. Like, and I get he would say like phase that in, and that's obviously like what you would want to hear. But it's
Yeah,
like, okay, like what rates should tariffs be at? Right?
yeah.
Like that's a question that I feel like I really haven't had much. So I would love to kind of talk with you guys about that maybe this upcoming week.
Did you listen to that Tucker interview with my boy Luke Grumman?
Maybe not. I don't think I've listened to that one. Let me
You,
just
you,
double check.
he did a good interview with him, and then like Luke Grumman, like he's always doing like podcast interviews, so like you can find him easy on Spotify.
Yeah.
Highly recommend my boy Luke. He's a great guy, great on a personal level, but he's also just like really great with like his insights and stuff. Like he's been so correct on so much over the last like couple of years. Like
When
stuff he was saying like a decade ago coming true now. It's just like it's really crazy.
when did he do it?
I want to say it was like April. It wasn't that long ago.
Okay, I'll
It
take a
was
look.
it was on Tucker's Twitter, so you could just like type in Luke Grauman on like his Twitter and find it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll
But
take a look. Because I there is some stuff like I usually listen to some of the bigger ones that like I've heard like I hear about. Like he did one with Dave Smith. I obviously listened to that one. Orin Cast, those kind of ones I did. But like some of these were that are like a little out there. Like he did the guys from Ben and Jerry's, and I'm like okay, like like I don't really don't give a shit what they think. Like I like Orin Cast because I think he has a little bit of stature at least within the administration, and so that kind of makes me be like okay, like let me listen to you because you're basically a surrogate in some regards.
he's
Uh,
actually like he really did not have. It's from my understanding, he doesn't have that much influence in the administration actually. So like
okay.
part of what screwed him over is, from my understanding, he was Romney's top economic advisor back in 2012, and so
Mm.
it's kind of like Josh said, like he's kind of they don't really like him because he's kind of got that, and then two, there's something else. Like I do know, like he directionally agrees with them, but like I don't know
That's what I'm
how
saying.
much.
Maybe like ideologically they're
Yeah,
kind of on
yeah,
the same
yeah.
page.
That's why.
But
Yeah,
like
it's like
you know,
so he definitely kind of gives you that, but I just think it's funny because like Josh made that point of like you don't agree on this or that, you're a rhino, but it's like like Warren Cast directionally agrees with him, but because he was like a Romney guy back in 2012, it's
yeah, yeah. No, I mean I think that's fair. Um, But going back to kind of the foreign policy part a little bit, because I let's do that as like a next one for this upcoming week. I know I've got some free time on that, but like just kind of wrap it up. I guess like what do you think? Kind of lay out the state of play for Trump in the Middle East and foreign policy wise, going the right direction, not going the right direction, and where do you think he needs to improve upon, and we'll end it there. So where directionally is Trump doing the right stuff foreign policy wise?
I feel like he has the right instincts in terms of like, hey, this stuff is unsustainable. Like, we really just can't manage all these different fires anymore. And two, it's
Mhm.
like, it's like I was talking about earlier, like military technology. It's becoming so democratized in the sense that like these insurgent groups like the Houthis now have
Yep.
like fairly advanced missile capabilities that can
Yep.
actually like yeah, I'm sorry if you can build a missile for a couple million that threatens a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier, like that's a sea change in
Yeah.
military affairs.
Yep.
So like I do think he's directionally like right in the sense of like okay, we've got to figure out this stuff. And then too like the whole like trying to figure out a way to at least manage the Ukraine thing, like cut a deal, hopefully end that. So that's one less like fire we have to like try to manage. And then too, like when he first came in, like he was showing some signs he wanted to cut like a detente with the Chinese. Like I remember us talking about that because like I had all like the the reporting on it. But then like it seems like that kind of went out the window with like the tariffs thing. So it's like I think he's directionally right. Like he wants to like bring back, he really wants to like reshore manufacturing. He wants to try to stabilize the global situation as much as possible. I just think it's like so. I mean, as for, in terms of like instincts, it's fine, but like in terms of like execution and really
Yeah, it's still
trying
lacking.
yeah, and it's like I said earlier. Like if you really want to like calm the Middle East, like I would just instead of trying to cut deals with like random militia group in Libya or doing this or that, it's like just go to Israel and be like, look, we give you this much money, it's time to cut the shit out, like in the Gaza war,
Yeah,
like so it's like directionally, yeah, but it's just like how do you get to like the end goal? It's where he seems to like really be stumbling.
yeah, definitely. I'll give I'll give Josh his take here, and then I'll finish it up.
Kind of similar to Austin. I think the I think like the way he's delegating is right. I think he's right about the whole like Austin said, where it's like, I think we're being honest about like what's sustainable, what's not. Um, Only thing I will say is, um, I think we should handle like a lot of the European side of things a little better. So like I would include Russia, Europe, all that together. I think we need to handle that a little bit better. Um, as far as like like you said about military technology, like it is what it is. So I think there's like room for growth here, but like you're kind of in like it's kind of like a quick turn though. I mean, like you can't just sit around on this for 3 years and speak the same stuff. Like you got to be able to see progress in it, or you're just going to kind of become a lame duck. So for me, I think it's more like I think we're doing. I think we're doing pretty much the right stuff for like on foreign policy stuff. Just I think we need to handle probably like dealing with like leaders and some other stuff a little bit better. Because I think long term we could see issues if we don't.
Okay. Well, I mean I kind of agree with you guys on the direction stuff. I think directionally, we're going in the right direction. I think he's honest about kind of the state of play. I think he's like, look, like I don't want to be dealing with this shit. If Yemen is, doing their thing, like that's and not just attacking our carriers and stuff, but like if they're still shooting down ships and stuff, that's going to be an issue for us. And like we already know the insurance rates and stuff like that have gone up for shipping. That's a problem for kind of the order that, the US has kind of built. So I think that's 100% there. I think the thing with Ukraine that's just kind of like I think the issue with him is it's kind of like he's waiting for the other side to kind of come to the table a little bit. Um, and I say the other side, I'll speak broadly on that, like whether it's China or Russia or Russia by proxy of China, like all that kind of stuff. And I think that, with basically Iran, I think it's kind of the same way. It's he's like, hey, I'm going in there, I'm bolstering support for those in the Middle East, and I think the thing that he needs to do is kind of bolster some support for Europe and kind of just show like a united front. And I think that would go a long way. And I think it would be pretty good for containing uh, China and what they're trying to do there. Um, but I think ultimately it's going to be what deals is the other side going to be able to make. I think Trump has kind of shown the reluctance, especially with coming down on tariffs with China. Like, hey, he's willing to work on his end on it. So, I think all in all, like he's willing to do his part and get a deal done, but it's just China needs to kind of decide where they want to go. I think the 90-day pause that we're in is ultimately going to be reflexive of it. I think if Trump, and I think that's why he did a 90-day pause. He's like, hey, if I get a deal, like, we'll permanently lower tariffs. If not, we're going to ramp it back up. And so I think that's why it's really important to get the support in Europe, get the support in, you know, the Middle East. And honestly, I know, Austin, we've kind of disagreed about some of this stuff before, but I still think you still need to bolster, the Korea, Japan, and like those kind of people in Asia. That's the only way to kind of, I feel like, kind of really kind of put the squeeze on them. And I think if you do that, I think we can get it done. So all in all, directionally, I think the one thing I'd say he needs to do better is I think he really kind of needs to show that he's done everything that he can do and the other side's not willing to work with him. And I think if you do that, I think that can really kind of get some of the support on his side that he needs, especially in the foreign policy. So
Fact.
we'll go ahead and end it here. And maybe on the next one, we'll talk about some tariffs and talk about some tax implications. I'm curious to see how Monday's going to go since it was released at the end of the day. So we'll see how it goes. I'm curious to see Trump. I don't know if I've seen anything with him come out yet on that, but we'll see and we'll talk about it. So, see you guys later.
All right, ready? Hold on one second, y'all.